Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Laura Ingraham, and this is the Ingraham Angle. I want to start tonight by addressing my commentary at the top of last night's show. A message to those who are distorting my views, including all white nationalists and especially one racist freak whose name I will not even mention. You do not have my support, you don't represent my views, and you are antithetical to the beliefs I hold dear. The purpose of last night's angle was to point out that the rule of law, meaning secure borders, is something that used to bind our country together. And despite what some may be contending, I made explicitly clear that my commentary had nothing to do with race or ethnicity, but rather a shared goal of keeping America safe and her citizens safe and prosperous. Furthermore, as I have said repeatedly on this show, merit-based immigration does wonders for our country's economy, our way of life, and how we define our country. I even said that in my opening thoughts last night. I want to make it really clear that my concern will continue to remain with the families who have suffered the tragic results of illegal immigration, the children put in dangerous and unfair situations at the border, and all those border agents around the country who work to keep our country safe. And now, could the expert class be possibly wrong again? That's the focus of tonight's angle. All right, the prevailing wisdom among the professional political prognosticators is that it's all gloom and doom for Republicans come the November midterms.
And we're 89 days away from a midterm election that is already a steeper than steep hill for the Republican Party.
If the best that they can do here is basically a tie, a slight win, that is not good news at all for Republicans come the fall.
The turnout lessons, the money lessons, all still suggest that this is going to be a good election for Democrats. That's not a debate. I think the debate is how big does the wave get?
The debate's over. Well, and they're already busy writing the president's political obit for 2020.
We're going to talk about unlucky 7. That's the average number of false, misleading statements President Trump has made per day since inauguration. It's also how much he's losing to a certain Democrat in a 2020 matchup.
I feel very good about the prospects of both taking back the House and the Senate in the midterms, and very good about the prospects of taking the White House.
And while it is true that Republicans have an uphill climb in the House, let's not forget that those same experts who are gleefully forecasting the GOP's demise are the same ones who had egg on their faces on election night. First, in its latest iteration, the Real Clear Politics average of polls about the country's direction finds that more Americans, 41.3%, find that Trump is setting us on the right track than at any other moment since December 2012. That's the right track, wrong track. Second, to the idea that Trump's base is shrinking, there is ample evidence to refute that. A brand new Pew Research poll finds that for most Trump voters, the warm feelings for him, I love that, the warm feelings for him over the past couple of years have endured. Furthermore, Trump has many more converts, people who voted for him but didn't like him, who have since warmed, than those who liked him in 2016 and have, quote, cooled. I love the warm cooled. And despite the near daily barrage of negative coverage about Mueller, tariffs, immigration, his approval ratings have remained pretty consistent. And they've even improved with his rural base, despite the stories we're told about the farmers who would turn on him over his aggressive trade policies.
In 19 farm states surveyed by Morning Consult exclusively for CNBC, 10 states saw President Trump's rural approval rating improve between May and the end of July. 7 saw it stay the same in that period, and just 1, Idaho, saw it decline.
I'm a big believer if you're in a bad deal, be it a lease, be it an agreement with a business partner, you owe it to yourself to step up and try to make it better for both parties and negotiate it. But for sure, it needs to be better for yourself. And I think simply that's what this administration is attempting to do.
We're going to trust that the president will have at least some success in negotiating a trade deal that will support corn, soybeans, and actually everything that the U.S. exports.
Now, despite all the positive trends for the president, there are a few real areas of concern. First, polling trouble spots. A recent NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll reveals that not only do most female voters prefer Democrats this fall, but nearly 6 in 10 suburban women strongly disapprove of Trump. And that same Pew poll mentioned above also found that women with a college degree are the most likely Trump voters to have soured on him since the election. And finally, a recent Wall Street Journal NBC poll found that just 36% of independents approve of Trump's job, down 7 points from just 1 month earlier. And also distractions. The president must, let's face it, keep his eyes on the prize. Check out the complaint of this former Trump supporter.
My issue with this president, who I voted for, is the fact that he has something negative to say about every other leader. But you try saying one little comment that's negative about Trump himself. He jumps into a fit and he has this Twitter tirade.
But don't women think men have thin skins anyway? I mean, come on, most of us do. The more the president, I think, veers off his message, I said this on Monday, and wastes time reacting to every distraction, whether it's Russia or Stormy Daniels, any of these other things, Michael Cohen, Avenatti, the more he risks losing, I think more voters like Mary. The economy's good. It's a period of peace and prosperity. So women like Trump the protector, the strong guy. They like that. But for these swing voters, he might not seem as charming when it seems like he's fighting everyone at once. They want things to calm down a little. For President Trump, the message is simple. Be the happy warrior we see at a lot of these rallies. Touting the economic resurgence, you can pat yourself on the back a little. Media's not going to do it. The renaissance in manufacturing, and talk about how you want the economy to benefit all people, forgotten Americans of all backgrounds, races, ethnicities, like you did this afternoon.
One of the single most important things we're doing is to help former inmates in creating jobs. We're creating so many jobs that former inmates for the first time are really getting a shot at it. Our unemployment rate is so low, historically low, 50 years. Now our economy is booming, businesses are hiring, and recruiting workers that were previously overlooked, they're being hired. It's a great feeling. It's a great thing that we've all accomplished.
By the way, prison reform, jobs training, that is vital. It's a vital issue to this country, recidivism. We want to decrease it if we can. And it's an issue that the president is desperately trying to get to yes on. And it might also have the added benefit of helping with some of those discontented voters who are on the fence as well. Finally, Mr. President, don't ignore that right track reading we mentioned at the top. As the Washington Post wrote ahead of the 2016 election, quote, the nation's mood is intrinsically important, providing a basic gauge of how Americans think the country is doing, and whether people are more optimistic or pessimistic than in the past. Presidents can succeed or fail regardless of the public's mood, but the public's overall outlook sets the stage for political debates. Sets the stage for political debates. That final line is most important for Trump and Republicans. Use that data point. Draft off that economic success. Be positive about America's current economic standing. It's a great time to be in American. We have problems, but my goodness, other than the early years of Reagan, I can't think of a better economy. Set the terms of the debate yourself. Do not be defined by others. We're already on the right track, Mr. President. All you need to do now is not let the wrong track get you sidetracked. And that's the angle. Joining us now with a reaction is Garland Nixon, a radio talk show host, Matt Schlapp, American Conservative Union Chair, and Candace Owens of Turning Point USA. Garland, your reaction.
Initially, I was a person who predicted Trump would win. Here's what I'll say. I think the Republicans will have some losses. They will definitely have losses in midterm because it's kind of like Yelp reviews. The people that are happy tend to kind of mellow out, and the people that are really angry are the most motivated, and those are the ones that are going to show up, and the Democrats are definitely going to have an advantage as far as people who show up at the polls. The question is how much.
Matt, some of the trends in this last election in the 12th District of Ohio, he pull out a victory, maybe barely by the skin of his teeth. But the turnout for Democrats was very strong.
You're right.
It was stronger I believe, than the presidential turnout in the same district where Trump won big. Now, Trump's approval in that district is quite high. So you can say the candidate made some pretty big mistakes, a couple of verbal gaffes that were really unfortunate. But does that portend other problems? They're jacked up. Blame the Democrats. We were excited in 2010. They're excited now.
I think that right track, wrong track is very important, but let's take a step away from that and look at what happened in the special election. You're exactly right. In the last week or 10 days of that race, his lead collapsed. He said some stupid things. He might need to go to candidate training school, which a lot of candidates need to do. But it also shows the motivation and the energy is definitely on the left. And for Trump supporters out there in the country, what they have to understand is the House is very losable. And they can't be cavalier about this idea that I'm for Trump and I'll take a skip on the midterm, because if they do, the House could be lost. And if the House is lost, so much of the Trump agenda stops.
Candace, the president addressed the issue of Chicago today, and he talked about how it's so important that we have good leadership, deliver results for the people on the ground. Should he go to Chicago?
Absolutely.
Yeah, tell us what your thoughts are, because there's some Republicans say, oh, that'll be a disaster. Remember, he was going to go during the campaign and they had to call it off because of protests. But could he go, listen to the people on the ground in Chicago, hear what they have to say?
Now is absolutely the time for him to make an appearance in Chicago. And first and foremost, Laura, I want to thank you for this coverage of last weekend. You did so much coverage on Chicago. I didn't see it across all the networks, but I did see it on your show. This is such an important issue that is facing the black community that is not spoken enough about. He should send the National Guard to Chicago. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's incomprehensible to think that 71 people were shot over the weekend and they haven't even caught anybody for these crimes. It's the perfect time as polling is up in the black community. The Rasmussen poll that was released 2 weeks ago shows that his support has doubled since this time last year, which means that black people are paying attention to the results of this administration, not so much the rhetoric of the left, accusing him of racism and sexism at every single turn. Now is the time for him to appear in Chicago. President, please do it.
Yeah, I mean, we had Obama do his My Brother's Keeper initiative. We had Al Sharpton move there temporarily. But there weren't that, you have a murder rate decline, but that's only after the really high average of the last few years. Something has to be done in Chicago. I completely agree with Candace. Let's talk about what the Democrats are facing. The Republicans have headwinds. It's not all peachy over on the Democrat side either. This was the new it girl for socialism, the new poster child for socialism, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said this yesterday when she was asked by Chris Cuomo about whether Nancy Pelosi is really the leader of the party or will be. Let's watch.
Do you recognize her as the leader?
I think absolutely right now, she.
Go ahead, please.
She is the leader of Speaker, or rather Leader Pelosi. Hopefully, we'll see. She is the current leader of the party. And I think that the party absolutely does have its leadership in the House. We have our leadership in the Senate as well.
Garland, I think she was more favorable to capitalism the other day in her comments than to Nancy Pelosi. What's going on with this revulsion toward Nancy Pelosi?
Well, two things. Number one, let's face it, the Democrats have been losing like a bloody heck for the last 8 years, and it's certainly not unreasonable to question the people who have led them, to Little Bighorn. But that
she also got a lot done as Speaker. I mean, they did Obamacare. Remember, they did Obamacare. They pushed the big stimulus under
the other
Pelosi.
Issue with her, and that is the Democratic Party has to understand that their millennial base, which will be the largest voting bloc in 2018 and 2020, have a different concept. They weren't around for the Soviet Union. The words socialism and things like that doesn't make
they think everything's free.
It doesn't mean anything to them words. They're listening to policies and the Democratic Party needs to understand that, because if they get the millennial vote out, they're in really good shape. And if they continue doing what they're doing and they don't engage that millennial vote and understand them, if they just beat them up and say, you guys
look, this is a midterm isn't about millennials. The fact is, the Republicans have faults, of course. The best thing Republicans have going for them is when people see the dead center, heart and soul of the Democratic Party, and it's radical, and it's left, and it's socialist.
They're going to shut down ICE. We're going to shut down deportation.
This is our best thing.
I mean, Candace, this was tonight, Anderson Cooper with Spike Lee. Let's watch.
Would you want to sit down with Donald Trump?
No.
And have a conversation?
I'm calling back. I don't use his name either. It's Agent Orange.
Do you consider him your president?
No. Might be Putin.
Candace.
Here's what I'll say about that network altogether. What they do all of the time is that they employ black athletes and black stars. We saw this with LeBron James the other week to try to, as a mechanism of control to the black community. They say, hey, look, I've found some of your idols. I've found people that are prominent in your community, and they're saying that they hate Trump, and they're hoping that they're going to be able to drum up that hate. But it hasn't been successful. This isn't working. They need to switch strategies altogether. As I said, it's not going to matter if they keep doing this. They can bring out any black person that they want that's going to speak out against Trump. The black community cares at this moment about results, and we are getting the results that we've been begging for these results. We're finally seeing them. Black unemployment at an all-time low. There are jobs. So look, Spike Lee, CNN, it makes sense, but it's not something that I'm really too concerned about. It's not going to impact the black vote for Trump in 2020.
I can't imagine I can't imagine what the left would do, what Democrats would say if someone said something akin to what he just said about President Trump. He calls him Agent Orange. He won't use his name. I mean, they went after
not his president.
They went after that Joe Wilson for screaming "You lie" during the State of the Union. Right? They crucified that Joe Wilson.
We heard that stuff during the
Agent Orange. An athlete went on television and called him Agent something akin to that. He's not my president. I don't remember, not treated like that. At least it'd be a follow-up. You'd be follow-up with, okay, what about unemployment? What about the fact that a lot of these Democrat-led cities are crumbling with crime and gang violence? And all? What about, the fact that his numbers among black people have gone up? I mean, they'd hit him with all these things if it was the shoe was on the other foot, Garland. I mean, yeah, you don't speak like that. I know you wouldn't speak like that.
No, but I understand it because you know what? For 8 years I heard that. Obama. There was like a big "not my president" kind of movement.
Never would I ever say that.
Go online and
he was my president.
I would never say that. Someone as prominent as Spike Lee, who's such a talented filmmaker. His wife was in my class at UVA Law School.
But I don't.
She's a lovely person. But
I don't think it's new. But I think what it does reflect, unfortunately, and again, this is not good for the Democratic Party. I keep saying
not good.
The Democratic Party.
Disrespectful.
The one angle is to get your people so angry to try to get them to show up.
Well, what are you angry about?
But I think the other part...
what are the Democrats angry about except Pelosi?
Right, what they need to do is they need to develop a platform that is attractive to the working class, and that's what they're not. They're making an error, and they may have some success in 2018 with what they're doing simply because people are upset. But 2020 is a whole different story, and if they don't get a platform together then they're toast.
This is Rashida Tlaib, who is one of the two socialist-approved candidates who Ocasio-Cortez endorsed, who won the other night, a Michigan congressional candidate. Let's watch.
When you were elected formally in November, you will have a vote as part of the Democratic caucus as to who will be the next Democratic leader, whether it be the minority leader or the Speaker of the House. Will you vote for Nancy Pelosi?
Probably not.
Probably not.
That's my answer. No, probably not.
Well, so the party moves kind of hard left. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is no, conservative Democrat.
She's almost 80 years old. It's not.
If they have a wave, if they pick up a lot of seats, there's no question that she's going to have competition. But think about this. Nancy Pelosi is one of the most unpopular politicians we've seen in the modern age. It could be Nancy Pelosi or worse.
Well, Republicans cleaned house. I mean, Republicans get tired of John Boehner, right, Candace? So Republicans got tired of Boehner. They were tired of him. God bless him. He's now lobbying for pot. So they got tired of him, and he's gone. So what if the Democrats want to get rid of Pelosi? I mean, that's probably smart in a way. Maybe it's smart.
They'd be probably smart.
It definitely is smart. But what I think is actually happening here is we're seeing a split in the Democrat Party. We're seeing the people like Nancy Pelosi, the Maxine Waters. They are just driven by hate and animosity for this president. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I don't necessarily think she's driven by hate. I think she actually believes that this platform could work, that socialism could work. So that hard left, they're being driven by a lack of understanding for mathematics and a utopian concept for how the world might work. And unfortunately, this is going to be problematic for them. If they can't figure out and get this party together, just the people that hate Trump versus the people that don't understand math, it's going to be extremely problematic for them heading into midterms. So I'm interested to see what's going to take place.
Candace, have you been attacked at breakfast lately? Well, what were you eating? What were you eating, Candace, that had them all upset? Was it pancakes?
I had chicken and waffles. It was a really good meal. And what's really funny is the manager said, he said, I thought for a moment that outside there were vegan protests to my chicken and waffles. But no,
oh my
they were not vegans.
And Candace, I think by the looks of most of those protesters, God bless them, you could have taken most of them anyway. No problem. You're pretty tough. All right, great panel, guys. I love having you all on. Now, it sounds like common sense. Permanently deploy more police. We're talking about Chicago and its most ravaged areas. But that new push is sparking a huge uproar in the Windy City. Details after this. As violence flares in Chicago, city officials and residents are yet again locking horns over a solution about how to stop it. One Chicago alderman, Anthony Beale from the far south side, is leading the charge on what sounds like a kind of common sense solution: permanently reassigning officers to the city's most gang-ravaged areas. But the proposal is generating huge blowback. Why? Over fears that it could generate a surge in crime in some of the safer districts of Chicago. But is this just another excuse to avoid badly needed radical solutions to stop this carnage? Joining us now to analyze is Horace Cooper, the co-chair of Project 21, along with Anthony Tall, a criminal defense attorney. Now, neither of you are with me in the studio, so we're going to have to deal with that. I wish you were here with me. But let's start with you, Anthony, because something has to be done in Chicago. The residents are crying out for solutions. This is one resident. We'll play her first. This is a young man. This is one resident today talking with Charlie Kirk. Let's watch.
He doesn't take care of certain parts of town as he should. They take care of downtown. They take care of the north side. South and west sides are left.
He was young to me, but he said, look, you take care of these rich areas, but our areas aren't getting the help. So we have a lot of police being reassigned today through the weekend to these bad areas. But what about that idea of permanently reassigning officers to the worst of the worst areas? Why is that controversial?
Well, I think it's controversial.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it's controversial, Laura, just because what we have in a lot of high police areas or areas that are police, particularly communities of African Americans and Hispanics, is we have over-policing where a lot of the innocent people end up getting tagged or pulled aside or stopped unconstitutionally against their Fourth Amendment right. Remember, I've represented gang members in L.A. I've represented gang members who, and they have the whole community afraid of them. So what we don't need is police coming in doubling the fear if it's not going to be strategically placed and constitutional provisions are not going to be there. There's nothing wrong with the permanent policing, but it needs to be constitutional provisions to protect the 98% of the community that is not causing the trouble and that 2 to 3% that are repeat offenders.
Yeah, the problem is that a small percentage of people are turning those areas upside down. And the carnage over the weekend was just unacceptable. Horace, there is a great concern in the black community about aggressive policing that turns innocent people into feeling like criminals. And these comments are heartfelt. They're made. You hear them over and over and over again. Yet residents of the south and west sides of Chicago on camera over the last several days saying, we need help. So there's two competing views here. Where do you come down?
Look, these people are living literally in war zones. It is unbelievable that the conversation is being held that grandma can't go and get her prescription filled, that her granddaughter can't get to school without a drive-by shooting, that jobs won't locate in those communities, perpetuating poverty because investors will not go where there is this elevated level of crime. What you need is a common sense idea. The same thing that happens when you're on the interstate. When the officer puts his car prominently on the side of the road, all of a sudden, everybody slows down. Even people who are law-abiding take notice. What we need to do is have an elevated presence of law enforcement in these communities. And it doesn't need to be for a weekend. It doesn't need to be for a few weeks. It needs to be a year, 2 or 3. if necessary. That's the way that you can make it safer, and that's the way that this war zone mentality can go away.
This is what Donald Trump... Yeah, hold on. We're going to play a soundbite from President Trump, and then you can react on the other side. This was today addressing issues such as prison reform. They even touched on sentencing reform, and he touched on Chicago. Let's watch.
We must strengthen community bonds with law enforcement, including cities like Chicago that have been an absolute and total disaster. 63 incidents last weekend and 12 deaths. That's bad stuff happening. And probably, I guess you have to take from the leadership. This is called bad leadership. There's no reason in a million years that something like that should be happening in Chicago.
Anthony, he's obviously dinging Rahm Emanuel's leadership in Chicago. Given your background and counseling, representing these former gangbangers and so forth, do you think Rahm Emanuel has done a good job?
No, I don't think. I think Rahm Emanuel has done a horrible job. But that's not really the point. The point is, I want to ask Horace, does he really think that with the statistics that we have, where African Americans are pulled over more without reasonable cause or without probable cause, or where they're arrested more often, or where they're sentenced harsher, with all of these hard statistics, do you really want a permanent police force there that's not strategic and that's not following Fourth Amendment rules? And what are you going to do to make sure that those rules are set, that Fourth Amendment reasonable standard that the founders put in there is being followed? I think that's very important.
You can hide behind the Fourth Amendment all you want. Here's the facts. Black Americans, particularly in Chicago, are dying as a result of the failure of law enforcement to be welcomed in and to let them play the role that they're capable of doing. Here's what needs to happen. What the mayor needs to do, what the governor of the state need to do, is create a joint task force where they immediately allow for the state law enforcement officers to come in. They also need to work with the Department of Justice, and they allow for new prosecution teams to come in. You absolutely are going to have to start sweeps.
I mean, the goal.
The
goal, guys. Hold on.
Here's the problem with that.
Go ahead, real quick, and then we have to close. Go ahead.
Yeah, here's the problem with that. There's white people dying in Appalachia, in Kentucky. Why aren't you so concerned about them? They're dying by numbers. I tell you why. Because when the police come there, they're not going to be over-policed as much as African Americans and as much as Hispanics.
Hold on.
That is not false at all. Why aren't you concerned about them, Horace?
Hold on.
Why aren't you concerned about them? They're dying in numbers.
Yeah, Anthony, we're concerned about all people here on this show. But the Chicago murder rate is still unacceptably high. It's higher than New York. It's higher than Los Angeles.
Stratospheric.
It has to change. I think we all want that. We differ on how to get there, but we all want it to change. We don't want people pulled over unnecessarily. We don't want people's constitutional rights violated. Sometimes the police will probably pull someone over, and it won't be fair. I understand that happens, and that's terrible. But if you can save lives this weekend and every weekend in the summer and beyond with smarter policing, with smarter community involvement, maybe President Trump can, offer some solutions with other faith-based leaders. That's a good thing. And I think we all have to get out of our corners and come together and get back to basics. In all parts of the country where we're having problems, whether it's opioid, Chicago, Burlington, Vermont, where they have a huge drug trade, we got to get together as a country and solve this stuff, guys, because otherwise we're just going to keep losing Americans unnecessarily. Anthony.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I don't want the environment of police being there to create more criminals, incarcerate more people, and those people go back into the community and create more crime. That's what I want to safeguard against. There's nothing wrong with that.
Those talking points are killing people. There is a small number of people in these communities that are creating a nightmarish existence.
Yeah, guys,
those people need to be pulled out of the circle.
They got to be taken out of the community. They've got to be incarcerated, and that, if not, we're going to see kids on bicycles killed again, as we did last weekend. All right, guys, great segment. Thanks so much. And Jeff Sessions is taking on one of conservative speech's biggest enemies. We'll tell you what it is when we come back. In an important speech that garnered very little attention, Attorney General Jeff Sessions condemned one of the biggest foes of conservative speech, the Southern Poverty Law Center. The far-left organization is notorious for labeling those not aligned with its radical agenda as a hate group. And in a very, very important address to the Alliance Defending Freedom organization yesterday, the Attorney General did not mince words.
When I spoke to ADF last year, I learned that the Southern Poverty Law Center had classified ADF as a hate group. Many in the media simply parroted that as a fact. They've used this designation as a weapon, and they've wielded it against conservative organizations, others than ADF, that refuse to accept their orthodoxy and choose instead to speak for their conscience. I wanted to come back here tonight partially because I wanted to say this: you are not a hate group.
Joining us now with reaction, Harmeet Dillon, an attorney and RNC committeewoman for California, does a lot of civil rights representation, along with Joe Alioto-Veronice, who's a civil rights attorney himself. Great to see both of you. Joe, let's start with you.
Sure.
The Southern Poverty Law Center is cited kind of by the mainstream media as an unbiased organization that is a national treasure because it points out the bad people. Okay. And there are a lot of bad people, like white nationalists, Nazi groups, that type of person. But then they also label, with the hate label, people like Ben Carson, who was put on an extremist watch list. The Israeli ambassador dinner with Frank Gaffney. They urged the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, not to attend a dinner hosted by this guy Frank Gaffney, who has views on Islamism and so forth. Center for Immigration Studies does enormous research on immigration. And, of course, the Alliance Defending Freedom, a group I've spoken to before that has litigated cases, most recently I think it's a wedding cake case at the Supreme Court involving the baker and the gay couple. What's going on here? Like, if you disagree with the Southern Poverty Law Center, you're suddenly a hater?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't agree with the fact that they're unbiased. Of course, they're biased to their own position, but that's what's so great about the First Amendment, is that they're allowed to do that. The problem here is that the Attorney General is using the office of the Attorney General to suppress First Amendment rights of these organizations in the name of religious freedom, which is yet another constitutional right. So, I mean, that's a real problem, because people look at the Attorney General as an office that should instill confidence in the government allowing you to enjoy your constitutional rights. And in here, he's using one constitutional right against the other and basically starting political wildfires.
Well, I think it's the opposite. I think he's actually saying religious freedom, which is defended by the Alliance Defending Freedom, is a sacrosanct right. And just for defending religious freedom, labeling someone as a hater and a hate group, Harmeet, I mean, that probably hurts their fundraising. It probably hurts any corporate associations they have. The label is meant to demonetize individuals, corporations, pulling back, and associations. And you see it on big tech, what they're doing with the suppression of conservative speech, and this is a different way to do it. Harmeet.
Absolutely. So, I like my friend Joe, but he's got this upside down. What has been happening in the government is that the government has been using and partnering with Southern Poverty Law Center's list to suppress speech and target groups. So it's only recently that the Attorney General called it out, but the FBI is continuing to partner with National Organization of Women, Southern Poverty Law Center, NAACP, and other groups. And SPLC is about as objective as Antifa. They are a far-left organization, and it's a disgrace that the government is using their imprimatur to silence speech. The real effects of this, Laura, are, for example, earlier a couple of years ago, the Family Research Council was actually shot up in D.C. by an attacker trying to kill people there because that group was on the SPLC list.
Oh, that's right.
In Silicon Valley. Yeah, and in Silicon Valley, like you mentioned, the effect of this is that matching programs in corporations, where a corporation will say, if you give money to a charity like Alliance Defending Freedom, an outstanding Christian First Amendment law firm, they will not match it if the organization is on that list. And, on top of that, Amazon will not match contributions in their Smile program if the SPLC has put it on their hate list. So who made these people, this Soros-funded and this far-left organization, the arbiter of what's correct speech in America and not? So it's fine for them, Joe, to have their viewpoint, but it's also fine for us Americans to fight back on that, and it's not fine for the government to use their false list as a weapon to attack citizens and their speech.
Yeah, they have a $500 million budget. They get a lot of money from a lot of rich people. Because Joe, my point is they would rather label people haters than have a debate about the underlying subject. I live that every day. People don't want to debate you because they lose on the facts, so they want to label you things. That's not American. Have the debate, vigorously. Don't label people haters, except the ones who should be labeled haters, like the white nationalists and the Nazis.
Well, but labeling people haters is part of their First Amendment right. And there are far-right groups that have $500 million as well. So, the real problem here is that the Attorney General's using his office to pit one constitutional right against the other. And where does that really end, right? I mean, you could look at a lot of religions and make the claim that they have some sort of hate speech, right? We shouldn't be doing this. The Attorney General should be uniting people here in the United States. But the reality is he's a darling of the Confederacy, and this plays to...
What does that mean?
Well, that's not fair. That's nonsense, Joe. That's offensive.
That's a point. See, I think that's poisonous. Joe, you're smarter than that.
I don't think so. If you look to his voting record, there are views there that are anti-LGBT, there are anti-immigrant. Of course there are. I mean, this is known stuff, right?
Okay, once again, if you believe in border enforcement and legal immigration reforms, you're anti-immigrant. I mean, people just rejected that in 2016.
I don't believe that either.
People rejected that in 2016. They don't like being called that, because when you say that, that means the Trump voters are anti-immigrant, and they are not. They're good people. There are always bad elements in groups, but they're overwhelmingly good people. So, guys, we're out of time. Great segment, as always. And by the way, an Atlanta school is facing an uproar after trying to ditch the Pledge of Allegiance. We have some breaking news on this story. Stay there. Well, an Atlanta charter school is reeling tonight after having announced it was going to ditch the Pledge of Allegiance from their morning agenda. According to the Atlanta Neighborhood Charter School, it made its decision due to the more and more students and staff choosing not to recite or stand during the pledge in recent years. The announcement sparked a storm of controversy, as you can imagine, and tonight the school announced it's backtracking on its decision. But could we see more schools across the country trying the same move? Joining us now with a reaction, University of Maryland professor Jason Nichols, back by popular demand, along with writer and political analyst Carrie Sheffield. All right, Jason, they're kind of backtracking and saying you can say the pledge or you can, say the school cheer or something like that. But what does it say about us that this is a controversy? I mean, I'm almost wanting to treat this as something that's hilarious, because I think those kids reciting the pledge is so cute, and I remember doing it as a kid. It wasn't controversial. It was just like what you did. Why are we here?
I think it's controversial because they want to unify the kids at the beginning of the morning, and they feel that the pledge, there are many kids that opt out. I can remember when I was a kid, there were kids that were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they didn't recite the pledge, and sometimes they would go to a separate room, and they really want to build community, and they think that this is getting in the way of that. Also, of course, I have to throw my little dig in there and say that if you are, against this, and if you have a problem with this, then you probably have a problem with Betsy DeVos and the Secretary, our Secretary of Education, who is trying to move more towards charter schools who get to take public funding but make their own rules.
This is a charter school.
This is a charter school.
Yeah. But you find saying the pledge, requiring that, your view is that that's divisive?
No, I'm not saying that that's divisive, but I do think that there are many people who opt out, and that's their First Amendment right.
Well, they can do that, but they can say one nation, and they don't have to say under God. Yeah. A lot of people just don't say under God, and they just go on. I mean, I don't remember this being a controversy. They just say one nation. Yeah. Indivisible with liberty and justice. I mean, apparently people do still believe in liberty and justice for all, or is that also controversial?
But some people just feel that it's best if they're not
if we don't have,
or if they're not a part of it.
Okay,
Look, I gotta
and that's their First Amendment right.
Yeah.
Look, I got to take issue with what you just said about charter schools, because if anything, this shows how responsive charter schools are. Because imagine if a public school sector, public union-backed teachers, when they try to make changes and there's public accountability, public outcry, nothing happens. So this is actually a case in point showing the agility of charters, and so I applaud that. And yeah, I am very pro-charter, and it upset me to see that something that was a charter school was anti-freedom, because charters to me equals freedom. So I am glad to see that they've done the right thing. But look, Laura, I think this speaks to the broader issue of trying to turn people against each other, trying to tear at our social fabric against things that represent the United States of America. And no one, including Martin Luther King Jr., would sit here and tell you, if he were alive today, he knew that our country wasn't perfect, but he knew that we were working toward a more perfect union. And when you try to shut down the Pledge of Allegiance, that's opposite of building a union.
I think we should just do jumping jacks instead, like push-ups. Can we say just drop and give me 50? Wouldn't that be better? We can do, Michelle Obama's about let's move. I'm all for that. So we can do that. I'd like to do some exercise at the beginning of the day. All right. I also want to get your thoughts on this. And this is something I have teachers in my family, okay, a private school and just recently retired public school. And should cell phones be allowed or banned from school classrooms? Because countries like France are putting government-mandated bans on cell phones for elementary and middle school students on their campuses, but more U.S. cities like Boise, Idaho, are doing the exact opposite and lifting cell phone bans from their students. Jason.
This was a tough one for me.
Come on, Professor. Do you want them to be on their phone, not listening to your great lectures?
I definitely don't.
It's annoying, face it.
It's totally annoying, and I know that it can be disruptive sometimes. But at the same time, as we've seen with some of the school shootings and things that have been going on, cell phones have really helped in those situations to call the police in emergencies. So I understand why they would want to have those cell phones there, but also cell phones have also encouraged a lot of bullying and fights and things like that. Nobody, when they know
that they're cheating. Have you caught anybody cheating using the cell phone?
I haven't. Maybe I'm just bad at catching people.
Oh, you haven't caught anybody?
I have not caught.
How many times during an average class do you see a student looking down at a phone, checking Facebook? How many times?
I can't even count.
Right. So, so they could be listening to your lecture, following, taking notes, getting their... Instead, they're on their phone. I mean, it's not good for learning. It's fun. You can play games, and you can. But during the class, you focus on the professor.
No, I agree. During class, they shouldn't have it. But I think having a cell phone.
Have it in your blocker. I think have it in your locker, or
have it in your bag.
Yeah,
well, I'm inclined.
Go.
I'm inclined, whatever the French say to do, we should do the opposite. So for that fact alone, I say embrace the cell phone. And also,
that's ridiculous.
In cases of emergency, absolutely. Yeah. And Laura, you said take notes. I actually take notes on my cell phone. So
Carrie, you're a young woman, but do you remember or not being 14? And you got the boys in the first row. They're texting each other. Okay, I'm sorry. In high school and junior high, do you remember?
Yeah,
a little older. No, you're not. But you remember
wait.
It's like
But Laura, isn't the difference that it's just updated? Because you would send paper notes, right?
Right, but that's less distracting. Yeah. Do you like me?
I think it's more distracting.
1, 2. No, it's like yes, no. I'll think about it. Remember those notes?
Right.
Those were fun.
I mean, if you have your laptop out, you probably don't need your cell phone as well to take notes.
All right. Guys, fantastic conversation. But I think it happens more than you're even admitting in your class. They're all on their phones.
Oh, definitely. I know. I agree with you.
So do you tell them ever to put them down?
I mean, it says in the syllabus, to silence your phone, keep it in your bag.
They're on their laps, though. You're making a really important point. Then they're like, we see exactly. It's like in the movies. You're watching a really important, then the glow of oh no, we got to put them away.
That's what I'm more worried about. I'm more worried about teachers not enforcing it. Teachers trying to be buddy-buddy with their students rather than enforcing the discipline. That's what I'm more worried about.
All right. Okay, guys, thanks so much. And the media and liberals' attempts to understand Trump supporters, well, it kind of fails a lot. And one professor may have finally discovered why. He joins us next. A lot of professors tonight with details. No matter how hard they try, liberals and their media brethren still just can't seem to figure out Trump supporters and their loyalty to the president. But Musa Al-Gharbi, a sociology professor at Columbia University, may have figured out why they keep getting it so wrong. He was on radio this morning, and now he joins us with more. Professor, good to see you. Thanks for being on in the morning and at night. You're doing double duty. Really appreciate it. Okay, so what is going on here with some of the polling and some of the research that you've been able to cull through?
So there's a few things that we see in a lot of the studies that are intended to understand the 2016 election. The main problems seem to be things like prejudicial study design. So a survey will ask a question like, well, what motivated Trump voters? Is it that they're more racist or sexist or ignorant, rather than any kind of balanced or positive attributes that could have possibly motivated them to vote for who they did? And of course, there's no surveys about like, well, why would someone vote for Hillary Clinton? Is it because they're anti-American or, so there's this sort of prejudicial study design is a big problem. And then there are sometimes just glaring errors, like inferential errors, statistical errors that somehow get through. Well, that get through by people who know better and by editors who know better, and they're cited by other people who know better, not on purpose. Like, I don't think it's a cynical thing. I think that for the most part, it's just this issue where the studies are confirming something, a view of the world that they strongly believe and want to believe. And so these kinds of errors can creep in and get unnoticed.
And then once one study is published or one poll, it just gets repeated, paraphrased in another website and another and another and another. I want to show for our viewers what we're talking about here specifically. One particular question which illustrates your point. And you're not a fan of the president, we should say. You're not a rah-rah Trump supporter. In fact, the opposite. Okay, question. This is a CNN SSRS poll. Question. Which of the following do you think is more important? Imposing tariffs on imports from foreign countries to protect certain U.S. industries, 25%. Maintaining good relations with countries that have been close allies of the U.S. for many years. Of course, people are going to say that. 63%. Both equally, no opinion. So that's a problem because, Professor?
Yeah, absolutely. So that result you got there was probably the result of what we would call a framing effect. So, for instance, if they rephrase the question something like, do you support maintaining, like protecting the U.S. economy or U.S. critical U.S. service, critical U.S. manufacturing?
It's a phrasing issue. This is just classic prejudicial framing issue. And when you say maintaining good relations to countries that have been close, I mean, that's just a biased way to frame it. I mean, it's so obvious when you read it. Also, something we want to get to is the, just really quickly, the pairing of Donald Trump with racism on the Google searches. Donald Trump white supremacy, Donald Trump xenophobia, 10,000 results, 2,300 results, 3,000 results. Why is that a problem in like 15 seconds, Professor?
Well, what's astonishing is it takes a long time to publish anything in an academic journal, like half a year tops. So the fact that just since 2016 there were these tens of thousands of studies that were published, all of them having the same, like if you survey the abstracts and the titles of these works, they all tell the same story. Trump voters were racist, motivated by...
Thanks for watching tonight. As always, our loyal viewers, catch me on the radio tomorrow morning. Until tomorrow night, stay safe. Be sure to check me out on Twitter and Facebook. I always love reading your comments. Shannon Bream and the Fox News at Night team are coming up.